Hello everybody, I'm going to show you two models of fertilization. So this is one embryonic model. I'll just show you the structures in this part. This is the uterus, and you know that in the wall of the uterus there are three layers. This is the innermost layer called the endometrium. Endo means inside, and this is the thick muscular middle layer, that is the myometrium, and this is the outermost layer called the perimetrium. So endometrium, myometrium, and outermost layer is the perimetrium. This cavity inside the uterus is called the uterine cavity. This part of the uterus is called the fundus. So upper dome shaped part is the fundus, and then this part is the body of the uterus, and then this part where the body gets narrow and constricted, this part is called the isthmus, only this constricted part, okay? And this is the bottom part of the uterus. This is called the cervix, and through the cervix this canal is called the cervical canal, okay? And when the childbirth occurs, this canal gets very wide, relaxes, so the fetus can get out, and this opening is called the external os, the outer opening or mouth, and this is called the internal os. So uterine canal has two mouths or openings. The lower one is the internal and the upper one is the external os. And around the cervix, this space is called the fornix. This is the uppermost part of the vagina that surrounds the cervix, and the space between the vaginal wall and the cervix is called the fornix. So this is the fornix, okay? And this structure is the uterine tube or fallopian tube. The free end of the uterine tube has finger-like structures called the fimbriae. So these are fimbriae, and where the fimbriae are attached to the uterine tube, this area is called the infundibulum, and then this area is called the ampulla, and ampulla is the part where the fertilization occurs in most of the cases, okay? So sperm goes this way all the way to meet the ovum here, and that is the fertilization. Then fertilized egg is called the zygote, and that zygote starts to move towards the house, uterine cavity, and as the zygote starts to move towards the uterus, multiplication of the cell occurs. By mitosis, the zygote starts to divide, okay? And when it comes here, the cell mass that is formed is like 2 to 8 cells, tiny mass between 2 to 8 cells, and that mass is called blastomere. And then more cell division occurs, and blastomere gets bigger, and when the cell number goes up to 16, between 16 to 32, that stage is called morula. So morula is a tiny solid ball of cells, and then the morula continues to move towards the uterine cavity, and inside the morula, the solid ball, a cavity appears, that is called, and that is now called blastocyst. So morula is a solid ball, and when a cavity appears inside the morula, that stage is called the blastocyst. So when it arrives here, just before it enters into the uterus, it is already a blastocyst. So blastocyst enters into the uterine cavity and gets stick to the endometrium. You see, this is the endometrium and this is the blastocyst, and that is called implantation. So let me quickly go over these finger-like structures are fimbriae, and this part is the infundibulum. This is the ampulla where fertilization occurs. You see the egg is here, ovum, and this is the sperm. So sperm fertilizes the egg in the ampulla. Then that fertilized egg is the first cell of new life, that is called the zygote, and zygote then divides into 2, then 4, then 8. All those stages are called blastomere, and then the cell divides more and form a solid ball of 16 to 32. That period is called morula, and then inside the morula a cavity appears, and that stage is called blastocyst, and then blastocyst enters into the uterus and gets stick to the endometrium, and that is the implantation. Okay. Then that implanted blastocyst becomes the embryo. Now this is an ovary, and inside the ovary, see, these are the follicles. These are the follicles in very early stage of maturation and growth. That's why they are small. And as the follicle grows, it gets bigger and more matured. These earliest form of follicles are called primordial follicles, and then becomes the primary follicles, then secondary follicles. Okay, and then you see inside the follicle a cavity appears. Okay, and that is the late secondary stage when you see the cavity inside the follicle. Each follicle has an egg or ovum inside. So this is the egg or ovum, and this is the cavity that has appeared at late secondary stage. And this is the most mature follicle called the Graafian follicle. The cavity is large and filled with fluid, and this cavity is called antrum. So now this large mature follicle is like a ripened fruit, very soft and ready to rupture. So what happens next? The rupture of the Graafian follicle occurs and the egg comes out with some other cells around. Okay, so this is the ovulation. After the ovulation, the part remains inside the ovary. It becomes an yellow structure. Lot of fat accumulates inside, and that's why it is yellow, and this yellow structure is called the corpus luteum. Corpus luteum acts as a temporary gland. If no fertilization occurs, it will last here for 14 days, and after 14 days it will be disintegrated, destroyed. Okay, but if fertilization occurs, it will stay there for about 3 months until the placenta is formed. Okay, and it acts as a temporary gland. Then after 14 days, before it destroys, it becomes an scar tissue structure, white structure, that is called corpus albicans, albino, white. And corpus albicans then, you know, breaks into many pieces and disappears. So inside the ovary you see the follicles of different stages of growth and maturation. These are the earliest follicles, and then primary follicles, secondary follicles, then late secondary follicles is the stage where a cavity appears, and then cavity gets bigger. This cavity is called the antrum, and inside the cavity you have a lot of fluid, so the follicle becomes very soft and ready to rupture, and this is the egg inside the follicle. So when the rupture of the follicle occurs, the egg comes out, and that is called the ovulation, and the part remains inside the ovary becomes an yellow structure called the corpus luteum. It acts as a temporary gland, and before it destroys, it is converted to a scar tissue structure, white, that is called the corpus albicans. Okay. Now here, if you see, this is 4-cell stage, right, like here, and this is a blastomere. 2 to 8 cell stages are called blastomere. And here you see the egg or ovum. This is the sperm just before fertilization, right? And this is a morula. You can see a solid ball of many cells, morula. And this is the released egg, this one. This one is here. So this is the egg or ovum, and now you see around the egg there is a thick covering that is called zona pellucida. Okay, thick covering around the egg, zona pellucida, and these are the cells, follicular cells, that come out with the egg, and they form a structure that is called corona radiata. Okay, so ovum or egg, zona pellucida, and corona radiata. So those are the structures you can see in this model. Now let me show you some of those structures in this model. So this is the uterus, and you can see this part is the fundus, dome-shaped part. This is the body. This constricted part is the isthmus, and this is the lower end of the uterus called the cervix. Okay, and here this is the uterine tube or fallopian tube, fimbriae. Okay, this is the released egg from the ovary. The egg has been released, so you can see the egg is inside, egg or ovum, and corona radiata around it. And the fimbriae are these finger-like structures. They try to capture the released egg and take it inside. And this part is the infundibulum, where the fimbriae are attached. This part is called the ampulla, and usually fertilization occurs here. Then fertilized egg starts to multiply. You see 2-cell stage, 4-cell stage. These are called blastomeres, and then it becomes a solid ball of 16 to 32 cells, and that is the morula. So this is a morula, and before it enters into the uterus, you see a cavity has appeared, and this is no more morula. This is now called blastocyst, and this is implantation here. Now inside the ovary, you see these are the follicles. This is the most mature follicle, Graafian follicle, and the rupture of the Graafian follicle has released the egg, and then it becomes an yellow structure. This is called the corpus luteum, and then corpus luteum becomes a white structure before it is destroyed, and this is called the corpus albicans. Okay, so those are the structures you can see in this model.